from the continent of Africa, in the kingdom of Ethiopia, towards the borders with the Sudan and Kenya, the river Omo. Along the Omo, the territory of the Mursi. Men of the Mursi returning from war. "20 miles to the north of here, these men have been in a skirmish with a party of raiders. A Mursi has been killed and one of the enemy shot dead by a Mursi youth. It's the boy's first killing, but these deaths are just 2 more to add to dozens of others on both sides over the past 3 years. Now raids and skirmishes are occurring almost daily in the war between the Mursi and their northern neighbours, the Bodi. This film is about a society at war. But it's not just about rifles and bullets. There's no need to come to a remote part of Africa to find them. What did interest us about the Mursi is the way they decide what to do about problems like war. For the Mursi reach all their important decisions in open public debate. This film is a detailed record of how the Mursi made their vital decisions at a time of crisis. This is Mursi country, one of the most isolated places in Africa. Cut off from the rest of Ethiopia by a barrier of mountains and by the river Omo, even today the 5,000 Mursi have had virtually no contact with the outside world. Flying in over Mursi country to begin filming, there was already striking evidence of the war. We could see no sign of the Mursi cattle. Finally, in the far south, driven down by the Mursi in an effort to keep them as far as possible from Bodi raiders, we did glimpse some of the cattle. Those cows down there were eventually to have a central role in the war and in this film, though it was to be a month before we saw them again. From the cows, we flew north along the length of Mursi country to a landing point well inside the Bodi area. 80 miles from the cows, the nearest point our plane could get down, a bumpy grass strip well to the north of Mursi country. This is Hana, in the territory of the Bodi, the neighbouring tribe now at war with the Mursi. Before reaching the Mursi, there was now to be a week's walking through Bodi country. From the strip at Hana, the walk to Mursi country was to be due south for 40 miles, heading down to the river Mara, which is the northern boundary of the Mursi. But already at the river Gura, only halfway to the Mursi, the war was inescapable. The Bodi elders of Gura come to talk. With us was an English anthropologist, David Turton. Over the past 3 years, Turton has seen at first hand how disastrous the war is for both sides.
It's disastrous, first of all, because, of course, people get killed, which is no small consideration when they've got perhaps the population maximum on both sides is 5,000 each. But also because they can't, this is very important, they can't utilise the grazing potential, the pastoral potential of their country while they're on a war footing, because there's no regular no man's land between them. These two groups, living so close to each other, cannot maintain their normal subsistence economies while they're at war.
Like the Mursi, the Bodi carry rifles left behind by Italian troops 30 years ago, virtually the only imports from the outside world. David Turton has been studying the Mursi since 1969, but he's often visited the Bodi and he's no stranger to the elders of Gura. Today, however, it's not Turton who the Bodhi really want to talk to. They're more interested in another visitor, a Mursi called Uli Chagi.
Uli Chagi, well, he has in a sense been thrown into a situation where he is basically the messenger. He came with me on our last trip to Addis, and he was with us when we landed at Hana, in a very unusual situation because he was a Mursi in the heart of enemy territory, slightly unnerved by it. But since he's been with us and since he's been involved in all these discussions, he has become the messenger, basically. I think probably he will, when we get down there, speak as the word bringer.
The main Bodhi spokesman is a man called Golan Minta. He speaks the Mursi language fluently, but he's a tough negotiator and has already predicted a 7-year war. And Golan Minta has unwelcome news for Uli Chagi to take back to the Mursi. The only way the war can end, he says, would be for the Mursi to withdraw from the river Mara and a place called Kuduma. He claims that both places really belong to the Bodhi.
Now tomorrow now kese karani na keli rena nganga na katakte na berko te hang og na yoga nganga uliwa okuye tono ko yogbalo iri betitono butomwe ini betitono butomwe ini beye nangni abalo so tono ko yogbalo
But despite Uli Chagi's diplomatic response, the Bodhi peace proposals are tough.
At Gura, we first came across what is probably going to be the sticking point, and if peace doesn't materialize, which will be the main obstacle. And that is the Bodhi insistence that, in fact, Mara, the river Mara, and also this cultivation area called Kuduma, are really their country. I don't think they can seriously envisage the Mursi ever withdrawing from either of those places. And certainly I can't see that happening because it's only been at Mara over the last 3 years where there's been any semblance of a reasonable crop. It is these Mara people who, of course, are most concerned at the moment with the Bodhi problem because they are the most northerly members of the Mursi group, those, in other words, who are right up against the Bodhi geographically.
For the Mursi here at Mara, the war has overturned the normal patterns of their lives. It's harvest time now, and there should be a great coming together of men and women who've spent the dry season months apart, the men miles away with the cattle in search of grazing, while the women cultivate the sorghum crop.
At this time, then, the cattle and cultivation, so to speak, converge, and it's possible for family units to be united in a way that is not possible during the dry season. In normal circumstances, therefore, at this time, there would be cattle within a very few miles of us here. And people would be working in their cultivation areas during the day and would be walking back to their cattle settlements to drink milk and so on in the evenings. At the moment, because of the trouble with the Bodhi, there are no cattle here, so you have the population now almost as scattered or as separated as it would be in normal circumstances during the dry season.
Sheltering from the early afternoon heat with some of the men who stayed at Mara is Rabbi Thella. Rabbi Thella is a Jalabai, an influential man. He's not particularly rich in cattle or ferocious in war, but when he speaks in debates, people listen. In a debate, any man can stand up and say what he feels should be done. But when a Jalabai like Rabbi Thella speaks, people say his words stick. There will soon be a debate here at Mara, so that people can decide what to do about the proposals Uli Chagi has brought from the Bodhi. Now, Rabbi Theller recalls how peace was made after the last war with the Bodhi 20 years ago.
Agemun, kotumura, huli kone noe, na rehe matawe na kieno kino marinyai. Age oi barari, ku bariti barari kia kini he bilo nyinge. Aba aku orkel tabai nga na komonuli hoi na thara nye kini si bihu na ku boro chole na ku chole na chole te chale kiti bo mori nyahu na kuru do buna hu tu ngo wish na ro ko bai no se nga na li boro ko ngai ko ka tan oro yana bina nisu kiti bo kutel hu mori nyahu kuru do buna hu usha gargara anganga.
These men of Mara are coming to a debate. Under a shade tree near the river, they will spend the next hour in a disciplined discussion of the Bodhi peace proposals brought here by Uli Chagi. Debates like this are the means by which the Mursi reach all the important decisions affecting their society. In normal times, the Mursi debate about everything, from where to move their cows to when to plant their crops. Over the month which followed the debate at Mara, it was possible to film a detailed record of how the Mursi continued to debate and reach decisions about the most urgent problems confronting their society now, the peace and the war. In the debate at Mara, the first speaker is to be Uli Chagi. To his waiting audience, he brings the word from the Bodhi. Like all speakers in Mursi debates, Uli Chagi uses a special language, a rich and complex variation of everyday speech, full of old words. A translation can only hint at the total meaning.
Lo hinona kanyanito oli ba oyo inyo ani kini hang na o se ke na berang agar songa ti marai ti kudu mai ba na matanay no ya yo gola bita.
The fact that there is such obvious order at first sight might be thought surprising by somebody coming to a society such as this, in which there are no officials, no political office holders, in other words, no chiefs. It's a chiefless society. There are no rules of precedence even, which determine the order of speakers. And there's no chairman who decides either who shall speak, or in what order, or the length of a speech, and so on. So, although there are no rigidly imposed rules and conventions, there does nevertheless seem to be some kind of mechanism at work which produces a result which, in our own society, would be regarded as desirable when it comes to public speaking, namely that there should be an orderly succession of relatively short speeches during which the speaker keeps to the point and says what he has to say fairly succinctly.
Amara kukudu mara mansong kamar boy buininge pli abai anaye yogoto pli abai nuye yogoto.
The man who is speaking, he obviously realizes that there are several men out there who are waiting and very attentively waiting to detect these signs of impatience in the audience. So he, therefore, the speaker, if he wishes to go on speaking, he has to keep the attention of the audience. The would-be speaker, therefore, is looking for his opportunity to stand up. So there's a sort of two constraints working against each other. One of them telling him, don't get up too early because you'll make a fool of yourself and be told to sit down. The other one telling him, if you don't get up soon, you're going to lose your opportunity and another person will get in and make the next speech. It turns out that it's very unusual for a speech to last more than 7 minutes at the absolute maximum.
As the men of Mara begin to debate Ulichagi's news, it's soon clear that they're not impressed by the Bodhi peace proposals or by Golan Minta's claim to Mara.
There's no doubt that, practically speaking, only men speak in meetings, and indeed, probably in the majority of meetings, there are only men present. You see women, but they don't really form part of the audience. They are probably sitting in the grass some distance away, listening from a distance. So it's men. The next thing to be said is men of a certain age. So men who are not members of an age set, men who are therefore below the age of 25, are not allowed to take part as speakers in a debate. So young unmarried men are not allowed to speak, but they ought to be present. And very often speakers complain that there are not enough of them present, that they're off dancing when they should be listening to these matters of importance to the community.
An influential man like the Jalabai Rabbi Thela usually chooses to speak towards the end of a debate, but he's equally hostile to the Bodhi proposals.
Jalaba is a term which the Mursi use to refer to men who not only speak in debates, but who have a reputation for being good speakers, or at least influential speakers, men of some public importance, in the sense that they speak regularly in debates and are listened to with some respect. Such men are often termed Jalaba. This is not an office in the sense that they are not elected to it or appointed to it, but it is a kind of informal leadership. Although these debates do, I'm sure, reach genuine conclusions about various matters which are important to the community, they also, in a sense, reach conclusions about the standing of certain men within the community. The debates, in other words, give an opportunity for men to compete with each other for standing and influence and status. One cannot help go on from there to wonder whether the same might not be true in our own society. In other words, that the participants in debates and committee meetings are not simply sitting around the table or standing at the dispatch box, concerned to settle matters of great moment, but they're also engaged in this kind of competition for status, and they're also taking part in something as a kind of performance which could be described as theatrical.
After almost an hour and 7 speeches, the last speaker is on his feet. Some kind of decision is forming, but not by any clearly visible process.
There is absolutely no voting. Now, voting, presumably in our own society, can be seen as a means of coping with the time factor, that we're usually in a hurry, and decisions have to be reached quickly. They have time, usually. Time to go on talking, and time, therefore, to avoid the split which inevitably takes place the minute you ask people to raise their hands. They can go on talking until there is a consensus. Now, to be able to say exactly how is the consensus reached, I think the main way consensus is reached is simply by process of long drawn-out talking.
At Mara, that is the decision. More talk.
There was no need for the people who met under that tree down in the river. There was no need for them to reach a decision, do we want peace with the Bodhi or not? The decision they made was, there aren't enough of us here. There are many more people further south around this river called Moizoi. So let us have another larger debate further south at Moizoi.
"25 miles south of Mara, Uli Chagi is on familiar ground. His route now is along a ridge overlooking the valley of the River Omo. Between him and the river is 7 miles of dense and impassable bush belt. The Mursi don't have any permanent villages, but in clearings hacked out of the fringes of the bush belt are a series of cultivation sites. At a place called Mardo, one of the cultivation sites is being harvested by Uli Chagi's family. But even down here, in what the Mursi call the stomach of their country, there's no escaping the war with the Bodhi. Uli Chagi's cows, which should be close to this cultivation area now, are still many miles to the south with the rest of the Mursi cattle, and even inside the family compound, the war has left its mark.
What one's seeing is the drying of the grain and the preparations for the storing of grain. These are activities which take place at this time of the year, so somebody who went there for the first time would have seen nothing exceptional. However, 2 months ago, where those grain storage platforms now stand, stood 3 huts.
The huts housed Uli Chagi's 2 wives, one inherited from his dead brother, and the other his own. Along a concealed path behind the compound, one of Uli Chagi's wives shows what has happened to the missing huts.
The huts, as we also saw, have been removed a fair distance away in the bush. The same 3 huts. In other words, they've been dismantled and removed into the bush. And that has been done entirely as a response to the recent incidents in which 2 Mursi young men have been shot dead and 1 Mursi young man has been badly wounded. These incidents took place both north and south of here, but certainly close enough to cause the people here to become extremely worried about the possibility of further Bodhi attacks.
A few miles away, more urgent evidence of the war. 3 weeks ago, this boy was chasing a party of Bodhi cattle raiders near Mara. He was shot in the elbow by a retreating Bodhi.
Gasho. Ngala mane. No let's go for by one hair. Ni kune.
After days of mounting tension since the debate at Mara, suddenly there's grim news from the south. A messenger has arrived from the handful of people who are down in the south with the Mursi cattle. His news is that the Bodi have managed to pass right through Mursi country to attack the cattle compounds. 2 herd boys have been killed. So the earlier decision to move the cows as far away from the Bodi as possible has failed. A new plan is needed urgently. Only an hour after hearing the news from the south, the men of Moisoy gather for a debate. One of the men waiting under the shade tree is the local priest, Konyonomora.
It's possible, I'm afraid, to say what the priest isn't. It's more difficult to say what he is. One thing that should be said is that he hasn't got any really significant political influence. He is not to be thought of as a ritual expert who performs certain rituals at certain times and for certain purposes, nor is he to be thought of as a settler of disputes, a mediator. I think of the priest here, and this is why I use the term priest to describe the Mursi word komoru, as a repository of absolute power. And that is to say, power which is not of this world. He represents a power which is above all this. And his presence within the community is looked upon as vital to its well-being. He's not actually shaping the decisions, but he does have the sort of, if you like, influence that our own constitutional monarch has, that unless the monarch actually signs an act of parliament, it isn't valid.
For the priest and his people at Moisoy, it's soon apparent that the peace ideas discussed at Mara will have little place here. After the news from the south, all the speakers now have one urgent decision to consider. Where should the cattle be moved to protect them from further Bodi attacks?
Ahiri orayanga nana bekariye na du sene anga na ulipo kele yo na kulugu pa mata ma bay dirnga kili kitone ba bola nga na yo ko boy sapo nga gal bol ko girango na boy kon tihire waningi tu mana errasu erra ke erro kwana kwada berra nga ko ture nga ejo nga bana nga kulia luhanga gerebi achahuri menga reseri na ke tai ko ni ko liwa ya bekare tai yo bai nga hanna mena ko tire tolon berri ko ko mtie na kauna loki ko do el tabi nga na kemezinga na ngani kutulung na bi na ko na ngani abi he ma do ka ta abi he ka bole ye ka to.
The next speaker scornfully rejects the idea of leaving the cattle in the south.
Menga mera liba na mezi na na ko ni ngani gimi geni kagaya menga na tu konti na bai na ko no lu or na bakela menga mera ringa liba tun ni nyana huli ibana uje se bai ma ginu ngase he kala tu na ke jizuanga hanga mere kare chaung ke mezi du hinke ke jina ku surani nga me ani tumuri ani kagaya loktu ngen lomi nasi ke zeta bio na ka kala mi go ba kuli abe mo zeta na matemeri na kisi yo na jabu
I can't call it by or I get the Nakatok Janga Moranti. Bana Butalinga about the Pinauri. A bit doba, Nakwaki Holly. Naba Kual, but leading a Katangano, lifting a biono, Gartanga, Nanga, Kurana Mogi. A man how to you. Anana cleaning a meditation. Hello, I think I give you a feel okay, the capable. The head by.
Speaking last of all, the priest avoids expressing any view of his own. Instead, he carefully sums up for the audience the balance of opinions expressed by earlier speakers.
And when the priest speaks in a public meeting, it is, in my experience, always in a conventional and ritual way, to be a sort of mouthpiece or to represent the solidarity of the group, as in a debate following an attack on the Mursi in which some Mursi have been killed.
To emphasize his call for solidarity, the priest now addresses his audience by an ancient word for the Mursi, tamai. Under the ridge at Mardo, near Ulichagi's cultivation settlement, boys begin work on a defensive cattle compound. The cows we'd first seen from the plain on our way in are back after 3 months in the south. As decided in the debate, they'll now be guarded from Bodhi attack in the defensive compounds. For the Mursi, the reunion with their cattle is a major event which gives back meaning and shape to the whole society.
It's obvious that the Mursi think of themselves first and foremost as cattle-keeping people. You've only got to spend a short time there to realize that for Mursi men, cattle are the be-all and end-all, so much so that if a young man shows a lack of interest in cattle, then he's regarded as something of a dropout. Young men should be fanatics about cattle.
Although the Mursi get milk from their cattle and eat them when they die, they're not kept for beef. In fact, the sorghum crop makes up about 3/4 of the Mursi diet. Cattle are much more important in other ways.
Cattle are used to express, represent, symbolize social relationships, the most important of which is that of marriage. A man cannot marry without handing over cattle to his wife's people, either her father or a brother of her father. Probably in the low 20s is a good bride price these days. There isn't a great development of artistic work. I mean, either in the construction of houses or the making of artifacts or in the decoration of their own bodies. And perhaps one could say that it's in their cattle that they seem to get their aesthetic satisfaction. They will sit and talk about and look at their cattle, comparing the different patterns, discussing the relative merits of different horn shapes. Indeed, they actually train the horns into aesthetically pleasing shapes.
Now that the people and the cattle are together, it's important to try and get some idea of the future. Some Mursi, like Biobume, have special skill in reading entrails. The entrails are laid out like a map of Mursi country, with the mountains down one side. From the position of blood spots, called stones by the Mursi, the direction of enemy raids can be seen in advance. But today the stones are more personal. This goat's entrails say that an elder brother of the priest's family is going to fall ill. Biobume is unhappy with the reading, and he asks to have a look at the entrails of a second goat, which has also been killed this morning. He hopes they'll provide clearer news. The second set of entrails are as worrying as the first. If they'd been more favourable, the stomach contents of one of the goats would have been used to purify the compounds after the recent deaths. But everyone agrees today's intestines are too disturbing for that. On the ridge overlooking the defensive compounds, men are gathering for a very special reason. These men are from Waran, a few miles to the south. Soon, there'll be many more from the whole northern area of Mursi country. They're coming here for the ceremony of spearing the priest.
Now, that expression, to spear the priest, is an expression which is used to cover ceremonies in which the priest officiates for making rain, for blessing the cattle, and also, as on this occasion, for a ceremony which is going to be held in order to make the Mursi successful in war with the Bodhi, a war which has now become rather serious. And in order to brace themselves seriously for this war, it is necessary that the priest should perform a ceremony.
The ritual attack on the priest's compound begins.
This behavior seems, on the face of it, incredible, that the Mursi should be going through a performance which seems to represent the killing of their priest, who is undoubtedly regarded as absolutely vital for the welfare and well-being of the community. I myself am not sure how this activity should be interpreted in detail, but what it does remind me of is something with which we're already very familiar from our own Christian tradition, namely the idea of a man who is also much more than a man being killed by ordinary mortals, and the belief that from this death, somehow or other, flows life or salvation, or call it what you like, for the group.
By now, the men from Mara are also approaching the priest's compound. The Mara people also send an advance party in a ritual attack on the priest. The smoke from the fire attracts the attention of God, from whom the priest gets his power.
The priest is not just benevolent, he is a conductor of enormous power, absolute power, and therefore he's dangerous, and therefore in a sense people have to protect themselves against him. And he is in a sense therefore an enemy.
Nga berita kabar dia. Berita tu. Kon tu monga. Kabar dia nak hari gunya baru. Na balle hola borne.
Ole buru belon shoyo baro ya korro we.
Bulu bangani adungan na dangani hino gore.
Otir kalamit main ari ay doli. Otir kalamit main ari.
Hali maraya kerana hali. Hali maraya kerana lami one lanyi tu.
Le berro. Tanya baru tiong ko termai.
Ala mo mi derung barahak.
Mudil.
Ala ko ko mai a ko te. Na beda basanga ngai na kebele be song.
Mudil.
The debate which followed immediately after the ceremony was in some ways a continuation of the ritual. Decisions were less important now. It was to be an occasion for people to unify round the priest. The first speaker in this debate is to be Karatiolu. He has been in the south with the cattle for the past 3 months, and he's to set one of the main themes of the debate when he attacks the people who stayed behind in the cultivation areas instead of helping to guard the cattle or attack the Bodhi. Karatiolu accuses them of sticking with their sorghum crop, which he calls their cow with no legs, while he risked death in the south. Biobume, the expert in telling the future, raises another common debating theme, the scorn of the older generation for the failings of the young men.
Ba kamari gore kamari ba yake biyo ke kyali ngabunu huna ke tatali basi yo kamari ai amu ni aha no ni jiro ina nu ina ngame oli ke galle hine jari nga jer tanga biyo nu ina
Keseni nganga. Na inga inga. Nyengi boy ko de bay he. Ri boy ne he. Kawara sapanga inga yana na gorra kuneo. Odoro ige to long puto.
One of the men who stayed at Mara is goaded into a protest at Biabume's attack. By singing his personal war song, the man asserts his fighting spirit.
Gene miss. Nyengi boy ko de bay he. Nyengi bari ki me ba. Kola be geda logo na kolo min tini be chigana logo sabo. Ala holi balo di dona na kinar raman. Kola be na o kerra ko yoya. Deso jinya keda no ramana dori ala done balo na done. Ngame abishik to lo nya na lo ki ko anga nyinye. Garsumbi. Anu inga. Banana.
After Biabume has handed over to the next speaker, several others continue the bitter attack on the younger generation. They're repeatedly accused of not paying attention to the elders and learning from their store of wisdom. But as the audience anticipated, the most extended and bitter attack on the failings of the young comes from the Jalabai Mitatu.
Mitatu appears to have achieved a preeminence in this northern part of Mursi country, so much so that no other speaker, elder, Jalaba, comes close to rivaling him. The Mursi describe speakers as being tall or taller than others, and there's no doubt that Mitatu is regarded at the moment as the tallest Jalabai. An attempt must be made anyway to contrast the role of the priest with that of the Jalaba. It's my view that the two roles are probably mutually exclusive. The priest embodies and represents perfect social harmony, what every member of the society wants and wishes and hopes for, and he also represents the values of Mursiness, of being a Mursi. The Jalaba actually take part in the settlement of disputes and in the running of public life. It is they, therefore, who try to take the best possible course of action, given that all is not perfect.
Finally, the priest rises to speak. Immediately, he begins the job of healing and unifying after the tensions and disagreements exposed in the debate. It will lead at the end of his speech to the surrounding of the priest in a mass demonstration of unity.
Nahale. Ini akiran. Hale piuru goreng. Goreng adoli. Ayo baritik, kersi kitis.
through their priest, the Mursi, proclaim that the reason why there are misfortunes, public misfortunes, whether it's raiders, war, death, disease, failure of the rains, the reason for these is that men do not get on successfully with each other in society. What they're doing very often, sitting under the shade tree, is trying to sort out and solve social problems which they regard as the most important problems facing them. Whereas a great amount of energy in our society is expended in solving technical problems, and indeed we've even got to the stage where we believe that the solution of such problems is an index of progress. In this society, an equal amount of energy is expended on solving social problems, trying to get people to get on with each other in society more successfully.
Ina